what is it that makes a video game city feel real? I think there's a lot of different cities that you'll find in gaming, and one of the criteria is probably going to be, what's the most realistic design of a town? How does it look? But really, I think the first and most important element that makes a city in a game feel real is that it's actually lived in by real people. And so when I think about cities that exist in gaming, I always think about MMOs first, because there are amazing cities that show up in all sorts of video games, but they tend to feel like just props, I guess, for something that's not really real, I guess. It's kind of like they don't feel like a simulated city. They feel like a set, kind of, on a stage. And in MMOs, cities feel more real because they're places where actual players come together and congregate. And so in that sense, the most real part of a city isn't the buildings or anything like that. It's that there's actually really people there. Real people are there. And then the other thing that I think is important to talk about here is that there has to be a certain level of economy, as in there's got to be a way for players to trade with each other, to have some sort of a currency that can be used as a method of exchange. And if you don't have that, then again, you don't really have the essence of a city, because cities are all about people engaging in trade of some sort with each other, the exchange of ideas, the exchange of money and goods and services. And that leads me to my final point, which is that you should have a certain level of supply and demand economics in play in a city that is vibrant, but there has to be something more than that which creates the sense of a society. If you had a supply and demand economy where people just essentially scrap over resources and fight to see who can get the most money, that would be a very dystopian sort of a society. It would be like a anarchy situation, and that wouldn't be fun really for anybody other than the people who win. And it also would be, in real life, that would create a situation where there wouldn't be a society in the city so much as just a network of gangs, perhaps, or something like that. And we see that in games like Albion Online or EVE Online. The populations tend to be rather toxic. They tend to be rather aggressive, and they're not really fun to play in terms of interacting with other people, because you start to realize the only purpose of the game is to try to fight people for resources. And that's cool to a point, but it wouldn't be fun in real life. And in a game, it's not that fun either, because at some point you realize that a society, an economy, needs to have something more than that underlying it. And that's all about getting people to come together to share something that's not necessarily a thing of economic value, but things of a social or aesthetic value. And for example, in Elder Scrolls Online, you'll find that there's player housing, there's all sorts of different things you can do, which would potentially involve players engaging with the world and with each other that don't necessarily revolve around how much gold you have. And in real life, societies are exactly the same way. If you went to a big city, you might engage in buying and selling things, but you also might take in a show. You might go just enjoy the ambience of looking up at the tall buildings and spending a day in the park, or just sort of enjoying the company of being around other people and having that atmosphere that you're perhaps solitary, but you're not alone. And so I think it's important to realize that there's a certain degree of a need for economic exchange and also a need for societal and interactions. And if you don't have both on some level, then you wind up having not really enough of the elements necessary to create a true simulation of a living and breathing city. You have to have units and measurements of economic exchange, and you also have to have a society which encapsulates something cultural beyond just money or competition. And then as far as city design goes in games, I think it's interesting how a lot of games do feel kind of like there's nothing behind the curtain. It's sort of like if you went to Las Vegas and you see all these really cool buildings, but you kind of know that there's really nothing of substance behind the facade. Like there's there's a hotel that's themed to be like New York City, say. But if you really look at it, you can tell it's not really New York. It's just a hotel that's got a facade that's meant to look like some of the skyline of New York. And it's not that it's not cool. It might indeed be cool, but it's not authentic. It doesn't feel real. And for example, in gaming, I would bring up the home city in Guild Wars 2 is a great example of this. Divinity's Reach is this very cool looking city on the outside, and you look at it and you think, wow, that's pretty cool. But then once you get into it and you look around, you start to realize that very little of the city is actually something you can explore or interact with. You've got these main streets you can go down, but you can just tell that most of the buildings are just a texture. There's not really anything you're going to ever do to go inside them or interact with them or anything like that. And it just leaves you feeling kind of empty. That's something I like about Elder Scrolls Online. If you sign in, you go and look around, you'll find you can pick locks and go into all sorts of different buildings all throughout the cities. There's lots of different towns, and quite often quests will lead you into buildings you would never have otherwise gone into. And there's just so much depth to the design. It feels like a kind of a living, breathing place, because there's so many structures you can interact with and do things with. And so I think it's not just about how much space a city takes up, it's about how much you can actually interact with it. And interestingly, that's not really just a video game theme either. I was thinking about this the other day when I was in Seattle for a weekend, and there was a time when you could go into more buildings and you could do more things. And now it seems like just because there's homelessness and there's crime in the streets and different things to a point, there's more buildings that are just walled off to the public. If you don't have a reason to be there, you can't go in, you can't just hang around. And that creates an environment where you could be in a big city and you could feel like it's a really cool big city, but there's not really much to do on the street because there's no there really are no services to interact with. There's not much shopping to do. It just really kind of feels like you walk in with a particular sense of expectation and anticipation that it's going to be a good experience, and then you get there and you realize, well, you know, there's actually not a whole heck of a lot really to do, and then you're left just wondering, you know, well, okay, what am I going to do while I'm here? Because I can't really go into a lot of buildings, and there's not a lot of shopping to do and things. So the quality of life in an urban environment oftentimes comes down to what is available to people who are just casual visitors, people who aren't doing anything in particular other than just visiting. You know, what is there for them to do? Are there amenities that are broadly available to everyone? And if there aren't, then it doesn't really matter how it looks on the outside. It matters how the experience is and how much depth there is. And whether you're talking about the design of a city in a game, or you're talking about the design of a city in real life, if you don't have much for people to do, then there's not really a lot of staying power. And you know, as I think about games, I really do think that's a big reason why I wind up staying around Elder Scrolls Online, because there's so many different little towns and cities in the game. It feels truly like you could go from one town to the next and kind of not run out of content, I guess. It feels like there's a lot of things to explore in cities, and there's enough diversity in the design that they all feel like unique places with their own backstories and lore, and the players are friendly to where you could interact with people randomly in the world or in a town square, and it could feel kind of natural, a bit like perhaps it would be if you were interacting with real people in a real city. So the sense of society and community is there, and that's pretty nice. And then, of course, there is a player economy where people can buy and sell and trade with each other, and I think that's an important part of a MMO too. So, as somebody who's kind of a fan of cities in general and also of gaming, I like to think about this, and I think it's interesting how the design of cities in real life oftentimes determines where we want to live, and the design of cities in video games often plays a role also in determining what games we may want to play, especially in the RPG space. So, if you are a RPG game player, what game do you think has the best city design? Or perhaps, what is your favorite city in real life? In any case, something to think about. Till next time, thanks for watching. Bye now.